Chapter 11. The Nautilus. Captain Nemo got to his feet. I followed him out. A double door at the far end of the room opened, and I found myself in a room as big as the one I had just left. It was a library. Displayed on the wide shelves of tall bookcases made of Brazilian rosewood with brass fittings were large numbers of volumes, all uniformly bound. They lined the walls of the room, and at their feet were divans, covered in brown leather, whose curved shape afforded maximum comfort. Light mobile stands, which could be moved back or brought forwards as required, offered rests for books being consulted. In the middle was a huge table covered with tracts and brochures, and among them a few newspapers, which were already well out of date. The whole harmonious scene was lit by electric light from 4 half-globes of frosted glass, each set into decorative whorls on the ceiling. I looked round in genuine admiration at this room which had been so ingeniously fitted out. I could scarcely believe my eyes. "Captain Nemo," I said to my host, who had sat down on one of the divans. "This is a library which would do honor to a palace on any of the 5 continents. I am truly astounded to think it can follow you down into the depths of the ocean." "Where could a man find greater solitude and silence more profound, Professor Aronnax?" replied Captain Nemo. "Does your study in the museum offer you such utter peace?" "No, sir, it does not, and I must admit that it cuts a poor figure next to yours. You must have 6,000 or 7,000 volumes here." "12, Professor. They are the only links I still have with the land. But that world ended for me the day my boat, the Nautilus, dived beneath the waves for the first time. That day I bought my last books, my last journals, my last newspapers, and since then I am perfectly ready to believe that mankind has stopped thinking and stopped writing. But these volumes, Professor, are entirely at your disposal. You are free to make full use of them." I thanked Captain Nemo and began examining the shelves and the bookcases. They were filled with works of science, moral philosophy, and literature, in many languages, but I could not see any books dealing with political economy, which seemed to be strictly excluded on board. There was one odd thing. The volumes, whatever the language they happened to be written in, were classified in no particular order. The fact that they were unsorted in this way proved that the captain of the Nautilus must have no difficulty reading whatever tome his hand chanced to pick up. Among the books I saw the masterpieces of the great writers of antiquity and the modern world. That is, the best of what mankind has achieved in history, poetry, fiction, and science, from Homer to Victor Hugo, from Xenophon to Michelet, from Rabelais to George Sand. But science was the most prominently represented on those shelves. Books about mechanics, ballistics, hydrography, meteorology, geography, geology, and so forth occupied a place no less important than works devoted to natural history, and from this I took that they were the captain's major topics of study. I saw the complete works of Humboldt, all Arago, monographs by Foucault, Henri Saint-Clair, Deville, Chassel, Milne Edwards, Quatrefages, Tyndall, Faraday, Berthelot, Abe Saki, Petermann, Captain Maury, Agassiz, and others. The proceedings of the Academy of Sciences, reports from various geographical and other societies, and by no means trailing the field, the 2 volumes which were what may have earned me a relatively warm welcome from Captain Nemo. Among the titles by Joseph Bertrand, his book called The Founders of Astronomy provided me with a specific date. I knew it had come out sometime in 1865, so I was able to conclude that the fitting out of the Nautilus could not have been completed before that date. Captain Nemo had therefore embarked on his undersea existence not more than 3 years previously. I also hoped that I might find even more recent books which would enable me to date that time more accurately. But I would have to look into that matter at a different time, and had no wish to delay our tour of the wonders of the Nautilus any further. Captain, I said to him, I thank you for giving me the run of your library. It contains a wealth of scientific knowledge, and I shall make the most of it. But it's not just a library, said Captain Nemo. It's also a smoking room. A smoking room? I exclaimed. So smoking is permitted on board? Of course. In that case, Captain, I can only think that you must have maintained some contact with Havana. Not at all, replied the captain. Please accept this cigar, Professor. Although it doesn't come from Havana, I think you will be impressed, if, that is, you are a connoisseur. I took the cigar which he held out to me. Its shape reminded me of a Havana, but the kind intended for the London market, yet it seemed to have been rolled using golden leaves. I lit it at a small brazier which stood on an elegant bronze stand, and took my first puffs with all the sensual pleasure of the regular smoker who has been deprived of tobacco for 2 whole days. This is excellent, but it is not tobacco. True, said the captain. This tobacco does not come from Havana, nor from the Orient. It is a variety of seaweed rich in nicotine which the sea supplies me with, though somewhat parsimoniously. Are you sorry it's not a London Havana? From this day forwards, Captain, I shall spurn them. Please do not stint yourself, and do not worry about where they come from. No official agency has checked their quality, but I dare to say they are none the worse for that. On the contrary, I replied. At this juncture, Captain Nemo opened another door exactly facing the one by which I had entered the library, and I passed into a huge room. It was brilliantly lit. It was an immense rectangle, with the corners cut off, 10 meters long, 6 wide, and 5 high. The ceiling, decorated with a tracery of arabesques, was illuminated, and cast a soft, clear light over all the wonders crowded into what was almost a museum. But it actually was a museum in which a generous, intelligent hand had assembled all the treasures of nature and art, with the artistic confusion reminiscent of a painter's studio. About 30 paintings by great masters, all in identical frames and separated by arrangements of ancient weapons and glinting armor, graced the walls, which were decorated with paper of a sober design. I saw canvases worth fortunes, most of which I had admired in private collections in Europe and at art exhibitions. The various schools of old masters were represented by a Raphael Madonna, a Virgin by Leonardo da Vinci, a nymph by Correggio, a portrait of a woman by Titian, an Adoration of the Magi by Veronese, an Assumption by Murillo, a Holbein portrait, a Velasquez monk, a Martyr by Ribera, a Country Fair by Rubens, 2 Flemish landscapes by Teniers, 3 small genre pictures by Gerard Dow, Metzu, and Paul Potter, 2 canvases by Géricault and Proudhon, and a few seascapes by Bakhuyzen and Vernet. Among works of modern art were paintings signed by Delacroix, Ingres, Decamps, Troyon, Meissonier, Daubigny, etc., and a handful of first-rate marble and bronze reduced copies of the finest statues from antiquity stood on pedestals in niches of this magnificent museum. The stupefaction which the captain of the Nautilus had warned me to expect now began to take hold of my mind. Professor, this strange man said to me, I hope you will excuse the informality of my welcome and the untidiness of this room. Sir, I said, I have no intention of trying to find out who you are, but may I be allowed to think you might be an artist? An art lover, sir, at most. There was a time when I took pleasure in collecting these fine works created by the hand of man. I was an avid hunter, an indefatigable tracker, and I was able to assemble a few items of high value. They are the last souvenirs I have of the land which is dead to me. To me, your modern artists are already old masters. They are all 2 or 3 thousand years old, and I do not distinguish between them. Great masters have no age. Is that also true of these composers? I said, pointing to scores by Weber, Rossini, Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, Meyerbeer, Herold, Wagner, Auber, Gounod, and numerous others scattered over a full-size piano organ which filled the whole of one of the room's wall panels. These composers, replied Captain Nemo, are the contemporaries of Orpheus. In the memories of the dead, chronological differences are erased, and I, Professor, am dead as any of your friends who are at rest 6 feet underground. Then he said no more, and seemed lost in his thoughts. I looked at him, feeling rather concerned as I silently analyzed the strange expressions which flitted across his face. He was leaning, with one arm on a valuable mosaic-topped table. He did not see me. He had forgotten I was there. I did not intrude upon his reverie, and continued my survey of the exhibits which graced the room. After the works of art, rare objects from the natural world occupied a particularly important place. For the most part, they were plants, shells, and other forms of marine life, doubtless personal discoveries made by Captain Nemo himself. In the middle of the room was a fountain, electrically lit. A jet of water rose and fell back into a basin made of a single tridacna. The circumference of the delicately scalloped edges of this shell, which had been provided by the largest of the acephalin mollusks, measured about 6 meters. It was therefore larger than the splendid tridacnae presented to King Francois I by the Republic of Venice, which were used by the Church of Saint Sulpice in Paris as the basis for 2 enormous holy water stoups. Okay. Around this basin, under glass in elegant brass-framed display cases, were ranged, duly classified and labeled, the rarest specimens of marine life ever subjected to the gaze of any naturalist. You can imagine how delighted this professor was. The subkingdom of zoophytes included several very unusual specimens from both its groups, the polyps and the echinoderms. From the first group were tubipores and fan-shaped gorgons, sweetwater sponges from Syria, several kinds of isis from the Moluccas, penatules, an impressive funiculine from Norwegian waters, assorted umbelliferae, alcyonarians, a whole series of the madrepores which my old teacher, Milne Edwards, has so meticulously classified, and among them I noticed some very fine flabellinae, oculinae from La Réunion, various specimens of Neptune's chariots from the West Indies, and lastly, all the species of those bizarre polyparies which form clumps and entire islands, and will one day into continents. Then came the echinoderms, with their distinctive spiny outer cases, which were represented by asterias, starfish, 5-pointed crinoids, Cometulidae, asterophons, sea urchins, holothurians, and more, making a complete collection of the individuals of this group. Even a moderately excitable conchologist would surely have fainted at the sight of other, more numerous display cabinets, which classified examples of all the members of the subkingdom of mollusks. I judged that they contained a collection of incalculable value, but time does not allow me to record them all. Among the specimens I will quote, just for the record, the elegant royal hammer shell from the Indian Ocean, with regular white flashes which stand out vividly against a red and brown background. A brightly colored imperial spondylus bristling with spines, rarely found in European museums and worth, I reckoned, 20,000 francs. A common hammer oyster from the seas around New Holland, and very hard to come by. Exotic cockles from Senegal, bivalves with shells so delicate that a puff of air would burst them like a soap bubble. Several varieties of Javanese watering pot shells, composed of calcareous tubes, fringed with foliaceous pleats, and much sought after by collectors. A complete set of conical trochei, some greenish yellow, from American waters, others reddish brown which thrive in the seas around New Holland, together with examples from the Gulf of Mexico most remarkable for their imbricated shells. Stellari, which are found in the Southern Ocean, and lastly, and rarest of all, the magnificent New Zealand spur shell. There were also wonderful sulphur yellow telons, precious species of Cytherea and Venus shells, the latticed solarium from the coastal waters of Tranquebar, the turban shell marbled with brilliant mother of pearl, green parrot shells from the China seas, the little-known cone of the genus Coendyli, all varieties of the cowrie shells which are used as currency throughout India and Africa, the glory of the seas, the most precious shell in the East Indies. Then, lastly, Littorina, Dauphinules, Turritella, Janthina, tube shells, volutes, Olvidae, mitra shells, helmet shells, porpres, whelks, harps, rock shells, trumpet shells, cerites, spindle shells, stroms, pterices, limpets, hyales, cleoderae, all fragile, delicate shells for which science has found the most engaging names. Kept apart from them, in special cabinets, were displayed ropes of pearls of the greatest beauty, which reflected the electric lights in flashes of fire. Rose pearls, obtained from Red Sea Pina Marina, green pearls from the Blackfoot Powa, together with yellow and blue and black pearls, all derived from a variety of mollusks, from all the world's oceans, and from a certain kind of mussel found in northern rivers. Finally, there were several examples, truly beyond price, of pearls grown by the rarest pintadine oysters. Some of these pearls were bigger than a pigeon's egg, and comparable in value, and more, with the pearl Tavernier sold to the Shah of Persia for 3 million, and was worth even more than that other pearl belonging to the Imam of Muscat, which I had believed was without equal anywhere in the world. Of course, it was virtually impossible to estimate the value of this collection. Captain Nemo must have spent millions acquiring all those different examples, and I was beginning to wonder where he had found the funds to satisfy his collecting whims, when I was interrupted by these words. "I see that you linger over my shells, Professor. They are, of course, of interest to any naturalist, but to me they have an added charm. I collected them all myself. There is no sea on the globe which has escaped my collecting hand." "Captain, I understand what a joy it is to walk in the midst of such riches. You are the kind of man who amasses his own treasure. No museum in Europe has comparable holdings of marine exhibits. But if I use up all my admiration on them, what will be left for the rest of the boat which houses them? I have no wish to pry into your secrets, yet I confess that the Nautilus, the driving power contained within it, the machinery by which it is steered, the colossal fuel which powers it, all this also arouses my curiosity hugely. In this very room I see instruments fixed to the walls whose purpose I cannot even guess at. May I be enlightened?" "Professor Aronnax," said Captain Nemo, "I have told you that you have the run of my boat. This means that no part of the Nautilus is out of bounds to you. You may therefore proceed to examine everything in detail, and it will be my pleasure to be your guide." "I do not know how to thank you, sir, but I shall not abuse your forbearance. I will ask only what function is served by these scientific instruments. I have an identical set of controls in my cabin, Professor, and there I shall be happy to explain what they are for. But first, I will show you the cabin which I have given you. You should know how you are to be accommodated on board the Nautilus. I followed Captain Nemo, who opened a door in one of the cut-off corners of the room and brought me back out on the ship's walkways. He led me forward, where I found not an ordinary cabin, but an elegant room furnished with a bed, dressing table, and various other items of furniture. I could only thank my host. Your cabin is next to mine, he said, opening a door, and mine connects with the large room we've just come from. I stepped into the captain's cabin. It had a severe, almost monastic look to it. An iron bunk, a work table, and a few lockers for clothes and toiletries. It was lit by a kind of skylight, totally lacking in comfort, with just the bare essentials. Captain Nemo motioned to a chair. Do sit down, he said. I did so, and he started to speak upon this wise. Chapter 12. All done by electricity. Professor Aronnax, said Captain Nemo, gesturing towards the instruments fixed to the walls of his cabin. These are the controls which are required for sailing the Nautilus. Here, as in the great saloon, I can always see them, and they show my course and exact position at sea. Some will be known to you, like that thermometer, which gives the temperature inside the Nautilus, the barometer, which measures air pressure and predicts changes in the weather, the hygrometer, which indicates the level of dryness of the atmosphere, the storm glass, which is filled with a solution which, when it grows cloudy, warns of approaching storms, the compass, which gives me my course, the sextant, which uses the elevation of the sun to give me my latitude, the chronometers, which allow me to calculate my longitude, and lastly my day and night glasses, which permit me to scour all points of the horizon whenever the Nautilus surfaces. They are standard navigational aids, I said, and I know what they are for. But these others doubtless are to do with the specific requirements of the Nautilus. That dial I see there with the moving pointer, isn't that a pressure gauge? Indeed, that is exactly what it is. It is connected directly to the water, and by registering the outside pressure, it tells me at what depth my boat happens to be. And are these others a new kind of depth gauge? They are thermometrical. They are They are thermometric. They are thermometric. Okay. They are thermometrical. Thermometrical. They are thermometrical sounding devices, which measure the. They are thermometrical sounding devices, which measure the temperature of the water at various levels. What about these other instruments, whose functions I cannot guess at? At this point, Professor, I should give you a word or two of explanation, said Captain Nemo. So, if you would hear me out. He remained a few moments without speaking, then went on. There is a potent, responsive, rapid, convenient form of power, which is suitable for all kinds of purposes, and reigns supreme on my boat. It does everything, gives me light and warmth, and is the force which drives all my mechanical appliances. That power is electricity. Electricity? I said in a startled voice. Yes, Professor. But, Captain, you are capable of attaining great speeds, and that is difficult to reconcile with the power of electricity. Until now, its dynamic force has been limited and capable of generating only a low output of power. Professor Aronnax, said Captain Nemo, my electricity is not like the electricity other people use, but that is as much, if you don't mind, as I shall say on the subject. I won't press you, sir. I shall settle for being amazed by what you have achieved. But one question, if I may. You need not answer if it is intrusive. The fuels you use to produce this amazing power must get depleted very quickly. How, for example, do you replace zinc, given that you no longer have any contact with the land? I will answer your question, answered Captain Nemo. In the first place, I will point out that there are deposits of zinc, iron, silver, and gold under the seabed, which would be eminently workable. But I have not used any of the metals which are extracted from the earth. I have made it a point of looking to the sea itself for the means of generating my electricity. The sea? That's right, Professor, and there is no shortage of ways of achieving that objective. For example, I could have created a circuit of connected rods, sunk at various depths, and obtained electricity from the differences in temperature between them. But I preferred a much more practical system. And what was that? You know the chemical structure of seawater. Of every 1,000 grams of it, 96.5% is water, about 2.66% sodium chloride, and small percentages each of magnesium chloride, potassium chloride, magnesium bromide, Epsom salts, lime sulfate, and carbonate of lime. You will observe that sodium chloride represents a substantial proportion of the whole. It is from that sodium compound which I extract from seawater that I derive the components I need. From sodium? Absolutely. When mixed with mercury, it forms an amalgam which is a substitute for zinc in the Bunsen batteries. The mercury is never depleted, only the sodium, and the sea provides me with ample supplies of that. Let me add further that sodium batteries are considered to produce the most energy, and that their electromotive power is double that of zinc batteries. I grant you that in the conditions in which you operate, sodium is superior, for it is found in the sea. Fine. But it still has to be made available, and by that I mean extracted. And how do you do that? Obviously, your batteries could be used in the extracting process, but unless I'm mistaken, the amount of sodium required by your electrical equipment would exceed the quantities obtained. It follows, therefore, that in order to produce it, you would consume more than the amount you would produce. And that is why, Professor, I do not use batteries to extract it. Instead, I just use the heat of coal. Coal dug out of the ground. Very well, sea coal, if you prefer, said Captain Nemo. And you are able to mine coal beneath the seabed. Professor Aronnax, you shall watch me do it. All I ask of you is a little patience, and you have plenty of time to be patient. Just remember this. I owe the sea everything. It produces electricity, and electricity gives the Nautilus heat, light, motion. In a word, life. But not the air you breathe. Oh, I could easily make all the air I need for my purposes, but there is no point because I can surface whenever I like. But if electricity does not supply me with breathable air, at least it operates the powerful pumps which store it in special tanks, which enable me, if I need to and for as long as I wish, to extend the time I spend at extreme depths. Captain, I said, I am happy to sit back and admire. You have evidently found what other men will doubtless discover one day, the full, dynamic power of electricity. I have no idea if they will find it or not, Captain Nemo said frostily. But however that may be, you have already seen for yourself to what uses I for the first time have put this precious power. It is what lights our darkness with a steadiness and continuity which sunlight does not have. But now, look at this clock. It is electric, and works with an accuracy which challenges that found in the best chronometers. I have divided the dial to show 24 hours, as in Italian clocks, because for me there is no night, no day, no sun or moon, but only my artificial light, which I take with me to the bottom of the sea. Look, it is now 10 in the morning. That is true. Another use I make of electricity. That dial you see there gives the speed of the Nautilus. An electric cable connects it to the log's propeller, and the needle gives me a reading of the current speed of the engine. There you are. At this moment we are moving at a modest 15 knots. Wonderful, I said. I can see, Captain, why you are right to use this new power, which is sure to replace wind, water, and steam. That's not all, Professor Aronnax, said Captain Nemo, getting to his feet. If you would be so good as to come with me, we shall inspect the stern section of the Nautilus. Indeed, I was now thoroughly conversant with the entire bow area of the submarine vessel, and I here give its exact layout, going from the waist of the ship to the bow. First, the dining room, 5 meters, separated from the library by a sealed bulkhead, meaning that it prevented water from getting in. The library, also measuring 5 meters. The great saloon, 10 meters, separated from the captain's cabin by a second watertight bulkhead. Then, the captain's cabin, 5 meters, mine at 2.5 meters, and finally, an air tank, 7.5 meters, which ran all the way to the bow. Total length, 35 meters. The watertight bulkheads had doors in them, which were closed hermetically by means of rubber flaps, which thus made the Nautilus absolutely safe in the event of the ship springing a leak. I followed Captain Nemo along one of the lateral walkways as far as the middle of the boat. There I found a kind of open stairwell between two watertight bulkheads. An iron ladder clamped to the wall led up to the top of the shaft. I asked the captain what purpose was served by the ladder. It leads to the dinghy, he answered. What? You have a dinghy on board? I said, rather surprised. Of course. An excellent ship's dinghy, light and unsinkable, which we use for short trips out and for fishing. So does that mean that when you wish to use it, you have to return to the surface? Not in the least. The boat is fixed to the top of the hull of the Nautilus. It fits into a dedicated recess designed to accommodate it. It is fully decked, completely watertight, and held securely in place by strong bolts. The ladder leads up to a manhole in the hull of the Nautilus, which connects with a similar aperture in the side of the dinghy. It is by means of this double opening that I get into the boat. The hole in the Nautilus closes behind me, and I close the other one, the one in the boat, by means of pressure screws. I release the bolts, and the boat floats up to the surface at a tremendous rate. I open the hatch in the deck, which is kept carefully closed until that point. I raise the mast and hoist the sail, or else take to my oars, and away I go. But how do you get back on board? It is not I who returns, Professor Aronnax, but the Nautilus which returns to me. On your orders? At my order. I am linked to my ship by an electric wire. I just send a telegram. That's all there is to it. I see, I said, dazzled by these wonders. It's as simple as that. Having passed the bottom of the stairs which led up to the platform, I saw a cabin 2 meters long, where Conseil and Ned Land, delighted with their meal, were still eating voraciously. Then a door opened into a galley 3 meters in length, located between the huge on-board storerooms. There, electricity, more powerful and responsive even than gas, was used exclusively for cooking. Cables reached under the ranges and were connected to metal plates, which distributed the heat evenly and maintained a steady temperature. It also heated the distillation unit, which, by means of evaporation, produced excellent drinking water. Next to the galley was a bathroom, most comfortably appointed, with taps supplying cold or hot water as required. After the galley came the crew's quarters, 5 meters long, but the door to it was shut, and I was unable to see how it was arranged, though that would perhaps have given me an idea of the number of men required to sail the Nautilus. At the far end was a fourth sealed bulkhead, which separated the crew's accommodation from the engine room. A door opened, and I walked into this area where Captain Nemo, clearly a first-rate engineer, had sighted the engines which powered the boat. This engine room was brilliantly lit, and measured not less than 20 meters in length. It was, of course, divided into two sections. The first housed the equipment that generated the electricity, and the second the machines that transmitted motor power to the screw. At first I was rather puzzled by the singular smell that filled this compartment. Captain Nemo noticed my reaction. During the process, he explained, quantities of gases are released, a byproduct of the use of sodium, but it's a minor inconvenience. In any case, we ventilate the entire ship each morning by blowing air through it. Meanwhile, I set about examining the engines of the Nautilus with an eagerness that will easily be understood. As you see, Captain Nemo told me, I use Bunsen, not Ruhmkorff batteries, which would not have been powerful enough. Fewer Bunsen batteries are needed, and they are powerful and big, which is better, as experience shows. The electricity produced is fed to the rear, where, boosted by very large electromagnets, it drives a novel system of levers and gears, which transmit the power that turns the propeller shaft. The propeller is 6 meters in diameter, with a pitch of 7.5, and can supply up to 120 revolutions a second. And that gives you? I asked. A speed of 50 knots, he replied. There was still something mysterious about all this, but I went no further in trying to get to the bottom of it. How on earth could electricity be made to yield such power? What was the source of this virtually unlimited force? Was it in the extraordinary voltages achieved by transformers of some new type? Was it in the transmission process itself, which could be ratcheted up to infinity by some entirely new system of levers? That was what I was unable to fathom. Captain Nemo, I said, I can see the results for myself, and I do not even begin to understand them. I have seen the Nautilus outmaneuver the Abraham Lincoln, and I have been left in no doubt about the speeds it can achieve. But mere motion is not enough. You must be also able to see where you are going. You must be able to steer to the right and to the left, up and down. How do you manage to descend to such tremendous depths, where you must encounter increasing pressures running to hundreds of atmospheres? How do you return to the surface? And lastly, how are you able to remain at the various depths you choose? Is it indiscreet of me to ask? Not at all, Professor Aronnax, the captain answered after a moment's hesitation, since you cannot ever again leave my submarine vessel. Come into the great saloon. It's what we use for our study. There, you will learn all you need to know about the Nautilus. Chapter 13. Facts and Figures. Moments later, we were seated on a divan in the great saloon, each drawing on a cigar. The captain spread out a blueprint showing the full layout, section, and elevation of the Nautilus. Then he began his description in these terms. Here, Professor Aronnax, you see the various dimensions of the boat you are sailing in. It is an elongated cylinder with conical ends. It has the rather obvious form of a cigar, a shape already adopted in London for a number of experimental underwater craft. The length of the cylinder from end to end is exactly 70 meters, while its beam, at its broadest point, measures 8 meters. So it is not built quite in the 1:10 proportions that are used for ocean-going steamers, but its lines are long enough and its curves sufficiently extended for the water it displaces to flow smoothly all round it, and not set up any resistance to its progress. These two measurements enable us to obtain by a simple calculation both the surface area and volume of the Nautilus. Its surface covers an area of 1,011.45 square meters, and its volume is 1,500.2 cubic meters, which means that when completely submerged it displaces 1,500 cubic meters of water and weighs 1,500 tons. When I drew the plans for a boat intended for underwater navigation, I intended that when floating on an even keel 9/10 of it would be submerged, leaving just 1/10 above water. To achieve this, it would have to displace a quantity of water equivalent to only 9/10 of its volume, and that is 1,356.48 cubic meters, and weigh the identical number of tons. I could not, therefore, exceed this weight when building it according to the dimensions I have given you. The Nautilus has two hulls, an inner and an outer. They are held together by T-shaped iron struts, which ensure that the structure is 100% rigid. The effect of this cellular design is to make it as strong as a dense block, as if it were solid, not hollow. Its plated outer skin cannot be breached. Its structure holds it intact, not the tightness of the rivets. The uniformity of its construction, which results from the ultra-accurate assembly of its parts, enables it to withstand the most gigantic seas. Both hulls are made of steel plate 7.8 times denser than water. The outer skin is nowhere less than 5 centimeters thick and weighs 394.96 tons. The inner skin, plus the keel, which is 50 centimeters high, 25 centimeters wide, and alone weighs 62 tons, together with the engine, ballast, assorted equipment and fittings, bulkheads, and the interior locking struts, in all run to 961.62 tons. When added to the 394.96 tons, the total weight of the Nautilus comes to the required figure of 1,356.58 tons. Are you following me? Every step of the way, I said. So when, given these conditions, the Nautilus is sitting in the water, only 1/10 of her is above the surface. Now, if I add 2 tanks with a capacity equal to that 1/10, by which I mean that they are capable of holding 150.72 tons, and if I fill them with water, the boat displaces a total weight of 1,507 tons, and will be completely submerged. And that is exactly what happens, Professor. These tanks are located one on each side of the lower level of the Nautilus. If I open the stopcocks, they fill, and the boat sinks until she is just beneath the level of the sea. That's all very well, Captain, but now we come to the hard part. I will concede that you can hold station just under the surface of the ocean, that I can see. But at lower depths, when you dive beneath the surface, will not your submarine vessel encounter pressure and consequently experience an upward thrust, which must be in the region of 1 atmosphere per 30 feet of water, or about 1 kilo per square centimeter? That is quite right, Professor. So, unless you completely fill the Nautilus, I do not see how you can take it down into deep water. But, my dear sir, replied Captain Nemo, you are confusing static and dynamic states, and this has led you to commit a serious mistake. Very little effort is required to reach the bottom of the ocean, for solid bodies have an inbuilt tendency to sink. Listen to my reasoning. When I began trying to work out by how much weight of the Nautilus needed to be increased to enable it to dive, the only factor I needed to consider was the rate of the reduction in volume which seawater undergoes as it sinks to ever deeper levels. Obviously, said I. Now, though water is not absolutely incompressible, it is at least not very compressible. Indeed, according to the latest calculations, the limit of reduction is a mere 436 10 millionths per atmosphere, or per every 30 feet of depth. So if we wish to go down to 1,000 meters, then I take into account the reduction of volume at a pressure equivalent to that of a column of water 1,000 meters high, or, if you prefer, a pressure of 100 atmospheres. The figure for the reduction will then be 436 hundred thousandths of an atmosphere. Thus, I need to increase the weight from 1,507.2 tons to 1,513.77 tons. The increase needed would therefore be just 6.57 tons. My head hurts. Is that all? That's all, Professor Aronnax, and my calculation is easy to confirm. Actually, I have fitted extra tanks with a total capacity of 100 tons. I am thus able to dive to considerable depths. When I wish to return to the surface and level off, all I do is expel water. If I want just 1/10 of the volume of the Nautilus to emerge above water level, I simply empty all the tanks completely. I could hardly object to these arguments, backed as they were by detailed figures. I accept your calculations, Captain, I said, and it would be churlish of me to contest them since experience bears them out on a daily basis. But, at this juncture, I see a very real difficulty. Which is? When you are at a depth of 1,000 meters, the hull of the Nautilus must be subjected to a pressure of 100 atmospheres. So if, at that point, you attempt to empty your tanks to lighten the boat and return to the surface, your pumps will need to overcome a pressure of 100 atmospheres, which amounts to 100 kilos per square centimeter. That requires a degree of power which only electricity can give me, Captain Nemo said quickly. I repeat, sir, that the dynamic output of my engines is virtually limitless. The pumps of the Nautilus have tremendous power, as you will probably have seen when the jets of water they sent up fell in torrents on the Abraham Lincoln. But as it happens, I only use my extra tanks to reach depths averaging 1,500 or 2,000 meters, to avoid overloading my motors. Also, if I ever wish to inspect the ocean depths 2 or 3 leagues under its surface, I use more leisurely, but no less infallible means. And what are they? I asked. This brings me naturally to telling you how the Nautilus is sailed. I am most eager to know. To turn the boat to port or to starboard, in other words, to sail on the horizontal plane, I use an ordinary rudder with a wide blade fixed at the back of the stern post, which is worked by means of a wheel and pulleys. But I can also steer the Nautilus upwards and downwards, on the vertical plane, by using 2 angled rudder blades located one on each side the hull at the exact center of the flotation line. These blades can be maneuvered into any position from inside the vessel by means of powerful levers. When the position of these blades is parallel with the boat, the vessel moves horizontally. When they are angled, and depending on the angle they are set at, the Nautilus, powered by her screw, either dives along a diagonal course for as long as I require, or else rises along a similar diagonal course. If I wish to return to the surface more quickly, I engage the propeller, and the thrust of the water pressure drives the Nautilus straight up, exactly as a balloon filled with hydrogen shoots straight up into the air. Well done, sir, I exclaimed. But, when you are at depth, how is the helmsman able to follow the course you give him? The helmsman occupies a glazed cockpit, which projects above the upper part of the Nautilus's hull, and is fitted with lens-shaped windows. You mean a kind of glass able to withstand great pressures? Quite so. Crystal glass, though a shock will easily shatter it, is nevertheless remarkably strong. During trials of fishing by electric light carried out in the North Sea in 1864, glass plate of this material just 7 millimeters thick was observed to withstand pressures of 16 atmospheres, while simultaneously allowing free passage to strong thermal rays, which distributed their heat across it unevenly. The lenses I use are at least 21 centimeters thick at their center, which makes them 30 times thicker. I grant you all that, Captain Nemo. But if the eye is to see, the light must be strong enough to disperse the darkness. And I wonder how that can be done down there in deep black waters. Behind the helmsman's cockpit is a powerful electric reflector, a searchlight which can light the sea for up to a range of half a mile. Brilliant, Captain. Quite brilliant. Now I understand the phosphorescence of what we thought was a narwhal, which was such a mystery for our scientists. In this connection, may I ask if the collision of the Nautilus and the Scotia, which caused such an outcry, was the result of an accidental encounter? Entirely accidental, Professor. I was proceeding 2 meters below the surface when we collided, but I was able to see that the consequences were not serious. Indeed they were not, sir. But what about your clash with the Abraham Lincoln? I am extremely sorry, Professor, for what happened to one of the finest ships of the United States Fine Fleet. But I was under attack, and was obliged to defend myself. But I restricted my response to ensuring that the frigate was in no state to threaten my boat. It will have no problem having the damage repaired in the nearest American port. Captain Nemo, I cried with total sincerity, the Nautilus is truly a magnificent boat. Indeed, Professor, replied Captain Nemo, genuinely pleased. I feel for her the way I would feel for the flesh of my flesh. If danger is a constant companion on board any of the vessels which are subject to all the perils of the sea, if on the surface of that sea what dominates the mind is, as the Dutchman Jansen puts it so well, awareness of the abyss, then the heart of the man who sails on the Nautilus beneath the waves has nothing to fear. No buckling of the hull, for my boat's double skin is as rigid as iron. No danger of rigging being frayed by the constant pitching and rolling. No sails to be blown away by the wind. No boilers to burst under the pressure of steam. No risk of fire, since my boat is made of steel plate, not wood. No coal to run out, since she is powered by electricity. No possibility of collision, since she is the only boat sailing in deep water. And no storms to face, because a few meters beneath the surface the water is absolutely calm. Now that, sir, is what makes her such an excellent ship. And if it is true that the chief engineer has more confidence in the boat than the naval architect who built it, and the architect who built it greater faith in it than the captain himself, you will understand how much trust I have in the Nautilus, for I am captain, architect, and chief engineer, all rolled into one. Captain Nemo spoke with infectious eloquence. The fire in his eye and the passion of his gestures quite transformed him. It was true. He loved his boat the way a father loves his child. But one question, indiscreet perhaps, arose naturally, and I could not refrain from putting it to him. So you are an engineer, Captain? I am, Professor, he replied. I studied in London, Paris, and New York in the days when I was an inhabitant of the continents of the earth. But how were you able to build the magnificent Nautilus in secret? Each section, Professor, was delivered to me from a different part of the globe, using an accommodation address. The keel was forged at Le Creusot. The propeller shaft was made by Penn & Co. of London. The middle plates for the hull by Leard of Liverpool, and the propeller by Scott of Glasgow. Its tanks were manufactured by Caille Compagnie of Paris, its engine in Prussia by Krups, the bow section in the workshops of Motala in Sweden, all its precision instruments by Hart Brothers of New York, and so forth. Each of my suppliers was given my plans under a variety of names. But all these different prefabricated sections had to be assembled and aligned somewhere. Professor, I had previously built my own boatyards on an uninhabited island in the middle of the ocean. There, I and my workmen, or rather the loyal companions whom I had taught and trained, completed the construction of the Nautilus. Once that was done, all trace of our presence on the island was destroyed by fire. I would have blown it up if I had been able to. So, am I to assume that the cost of building the boat was colossal? Professor Aronnax, it costs 1,125 francs per ton to build an iron ship. The Nautilus has a displacement of 1,500 tons, which means it cost 1,687,000 francs, or 2 million if we include fixtures and fittings, and 4 or 5 million if we add the works of art and the various collections on board. One final question, Captain. Please. You, must be very rich. Limitlessly rich, sir. So rich that I could, without feeling it, pay off the whole of France's national debt of 10 billion. I stared at this strange man who had spoken these words. Was he taking advantage of my credulity? The future would answer my question. Chapter 14. The Black River. The area of the globe covered by water is estimated to be 3,832,558 square myriameters. That is 38 billion hectares. This mass of water amounts to 2,250 million cubic miles and would form a sphere with a diameter of 60 leagues, weighing 3 quintillion tons. To understand this last figure, it should be borne in mind that a quintillion is to a billion what a billion is to one. That is, there are as many billions in a quintillion as there are ones in a billion. Now, this liquid mass is more or less the quantity of water which would flow down all the rivers in the world over a period of 40,000 years. During the geological epochs, the age of fire followed the age of water. In the beginning, the sea entirely covered the globe. Then, gradually, during the Silurian period, the tops of mountains appeared, islands emerged, disappeared during partial deluges, reappeared, joined together, formed continents, and finally these land masses became geographically fixed in the form in which we now see them. The process of solidification forced the liquid element to disgorge 37,657 square miles of dry land, the equivalent of 12,916 million hectares. The way the continents are configured divides the water into 5 major parts: the glacial Arctic Ocean, the glacial Antarctic Ocean, the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic, and the Pacific. The Pacific Ocean stretches north to south between the 2 polar circles and east to west from Asia to the Americas, over a span of 145 degrees of longitude. It is the calmest of all the seas. Its currents are broad and slow, its tides modest, and its rainfall abundant. It was this ocean that fate first destined me to roam in these strange circumstances. Professor Aronnax, said Captain Nemo, we shall now, if you have no objection, take our exact position and fix our point of departure for our forthcoming journey. It is 11:45 noon. I shall now begin to surface. The captain pressed the electric bell 3 times. The pumps began expelling water from the tanks. The needle of the pressure gauge registered the different pressures as the Nautilus rose and then stopped. We're there, said Captain Nemo. I proceeded to the central staircase, which led up to the platform. I climbed the metal steps, and through the open hatchway I arrived at the highest part of the Nautilus. The platform stood just 80 centimeters out of the water. The forward and rear sections of the Nautilus were tapered, justifying the description of the boat as a long cigar. I noticed that its metal plates were slightly overlapped, and looked like the scales which cover the bodies of the larger terrestrial reptiles. I now saw how natural it was that, despite the best telescopes, the vessel should always have been assumed to be a marine mammal. In the middle of the platform, the dinghy, bolted in its recess, formed a low swelling on the hull of the boat. Fore and aft were two knee-high structures, with sloping sides inset with thick glass lenses. One was intended for the helmsman, who was steering the Nautilus, and the other was the side of the electric beam which lit his way. The sea was magnificent, and the sky cloudless. The elongated vessel was scarcely affected by the swell of the ocean. A light easterly breeze purled the surface of the water. The horizon, now free of mist, provided the best conditions for taking observations. There was nothing in sight. No reefs, no small islands, no Abraham Lincoln. Just empty, open sea. Captain Nemo brought out his sextant, which he used to take the elevation of the sun. This would give him our latitude. He paused for a few minutes for the glowing disk to touch the edge of the horizon. He did not move a muscle while taking his reading, and the instrument would not have been steadier if it had been held by a marble hand. "Midday," he said. "And now, Professor, when you are ready." I cast one last look over the slightly yellowish waters of Japan's coastal seas, and then went below to the great saloon. Once there, the captain jotted down his reading and referred to his chronometer to calculate his longitude, which he checked against previous readings. Then he said, "Professor, our position is 137 degrees and 15 minutes west." "Which meridian are you using?" I asked quickly, hoping that the captain's reply might give me his nationality. "Oh, I have a number of chronometers, which are set variously by the Paris, Greenwich, and Washington meridians. But in your honor, I shall use the Paris meridian." His answer told me nothing. I bowed, and the captain went on. "Longitude 137 degrees, 15 minutes west of the Paris meridian, and 30 degrees, 7 minutes latitude north. That puts us at about 300 miles off the coast of Japan. So it is today, the 8th of November, at 12 noon, that we begin our voyage of exploration under the seas." "May God protect us," I said. "And now, Professor," added the captain, "I will leave you to your studies. I have set a course east-northeast at a depth of 50 meters. You have here large-scale charts on which you can follow our progress. This room is entirely at your disposal. With your leave, I shall withdraw." Captain Nemo bowed and left. I remained alone, lost in my thoughts. They were all focused on the master of the Nautilus. Would I ever discover the nationality of this strange man, who boasted to have none? Who had caused the loathing he felt for humankind, the hatred which might perhaps be translated into terrible acts of revenge? Was he one of those misunderstood scholars, a genius who had been hard done by, to use one of Conseil's phrases, a modern Galileo, or one of those men of science like the American Maury, whose career was wrecked by political revolution? This I could not yet say. I, who had been delivered by chance on board his boat, I, whose life he held in his hands. I had been given a cool welcome, though a hospitable one, except that he had never shaken the hand I had held out to him, and he had never offered me his. I remained wrapped in my thoughts for a whole hour, during which I tried to solve the mystery which concerned me so closely. Then my eye fell on the large planisphere that stood on a table, and I placed my finger on the exact place where the observed degrees of latitude and longitude converged. Seas have rivers, just as continents do. They are special currents, recognizable by their temperature and color. The most remarkable of them all is known as the Gulf Stream. Science has determined the direction of the globe's 5 major currents, one in the North Atlantic, another in the South Atlantic, a third in the North Pacific, a fourth in the South Pacific, and a fifth in the Southern Indian Ocean. It is more than probable that there was once a sixth in the Northern Indian Ocean, when the Caspian and Aral Seas, being then a part of the Great Lakes of Asia, formed a single unbroken expanse of water. Now, flowing under the place marked on the planisphere was one of these currents known to the Japanese as the Kuroskivo, the Black River, which after leaving the Bay of Bengal, where it is heated by the perpendicular rays of the tropical sun, crosses the Strait of Malacca, flows up the coast of Asia, forms a loop in the North Pacific with the Aleutian Islands as its furthest point, carrying with it the trunks of camphor trees and other kinds of indigenous debris, and making a vivid contrast between the pure indigo of its waters and the surrounding ocean. It was this current that the Nautilus was now about to join. I tracked its course with both eyes. I saw it disappear in the vastness of the Pacific, and was feeling that I was being swept along by it, when Ned Land and Conseil appeared at the door of the great saloon. Both my valiant companions looked as if turned to stone by the sight of so many wonders massed before them.
"Where is this?"
cried the Canadian.
"Where are we? In the museum in Quebec?"
"If monsieur pleases," said Conseil, "it looks more like the Hôtel du Samarand in Paris."
"Ah, there you are,"
I said, gesturing them to come in.
"You're neither in Canada nor France,
but aboard the Nautilus, and 50 meters below sea level."
"I believe what monsieur says because monsieur says it,"
replied Conseil.
"But, to be frank, how could anyone expect a simple Fleming such as myself not to be surprised by a place such as this?"
"Look and be amazed. For an expert classifier like you, there is a great deal of work to be done here." I did not need to encourage the excellent Conseil, who was already hunched over the display cases, muttering words in the language of naturalists. Class of gastropods, family of Bucidinae, genus Cowrie, species Cypraea madagascariensis, and so on. Meanwhile, Ned Land, who was not much of a conchologist, was asking me about my interview with Captain Nemo. Had I found out who he was, where he came from, where he was going, how deep he was taking us, plus a lot of other questions which I did not have time to answer. I told him what I knew, or rather all I didn't know, and in turn asked what he had seen or heard on board.
"I haven't seen or heard anything," replied the Canadian. "I haven't even caught sight of any of the boat's crew. Are they by any chance electric too?"
"Electric?"
"Hell's teeth, a man might be tempted to think so. But how about you, Professor?" asked Ned Land, who was always like a dog with a bone. "Can you tell me how many men are on board? 10, 20, 50, 100?
"That I can't, Mr. Land. But just pause for a moment. Stop thinking about taking the ship over or escaping. This boat is a masterpiece of industrial age naval architecture, and I would have been very sorry not to have seen it. Many people would be happy to be in the situation which has been forced on us, if only to be able to see all these wonderful things. So, calm down, and let us try to work out what is going on."
"See!" cried the harpooner. "But we can't see anything, nor will we see out of this metal prison. We're moving. We're sailing blind."
Ned Land was just saying these last words when we were suddenly plunged into complete and utter darkness. The luminous ceiling was snuffed out so quickly that it made my eyes hurt, an effect not dissimilar to that produced by moving from deep shadow into very bright light. We stood there, not speaking, not moving, not knowing what surprise, pleasant or unpleasant, awaited us. Then there was a sliding sound. It was as if panels on the sides of the Nautilus were being closed, or possibly opened.
"It's the end! It's all over," said Ned Land.
Order of hydromedusas, murmured Conseil. Suddenly both walls of the room were illuminated by a brightness which entered through two oblong openings. The mass of water outside became visible, brilliantly lit by electrical power. Two plates of glass separated us from the sea. At first, I went weak at the thought that these fragile barriers might break, but strong brass frames held them firmly and gave them almost unlimited strength. The sea was clearly visible, over a radius of a mile all round the Nautilus. What a sight! Whose pen could describe it? Who could capture the effects of the light through those expanses of transparent water, and the subtlety of the imperceptible stages by which it faded as it merged with the upper and lower levels of the ocean? The diaphanous nature of the sea is well known, as is the fact that seawater is clearer than rock water. The mineral and organic matter which is held in suspension increases its transparency. In certain parts of the ocean, in the Caribbean, the sandy bottom is visible 145 meters down and looks amazingly clear. Indeed, the sun's rays appear to penetrate as far as a depth of 300 meters. But in the marine environment through which the Nautilus was sailing, the brightness of its electric lights was being produced in the sea itself. It was not illuminated water. It was liquid light. If we allow Ehrenberg's hypothesis, which states that the lower depths are lit by the phenomenon of phosphorescence, then nature has certainly reserved one of her most amazing sights for the denizens of the deep, as I could judge by the myriad effects of that luminosity. On each side I had an unobstructed view of those unexplored depths. The darkness of the great saloon emphasized the brightness outside, and we watched as if its pure crystal window was the glass pane of an immense aquarium. The Nautilus did not appear to be moving. The reason for this was that there were no fixed reference points. However, now and then as we watched, lines of the water left by the prow rushed past at a tremendous rate. Agog with wonder, we leaned on our elbows in front of our windows. Not one of us had so far broken our stunned silence. Then Conseil said, "You wanted to see, Ned. Well, now you're seeing." "Curious, very curious," said the Canadian, who, forgetting his rages and all his plans of escape, was irresistibly fascinated. "A man would come a long way to see a sight like this." "Ah," I exclaimed, "I can understand the life our host leads. He has created a world apart, which reserved its most amazing splendors just for his eyes." "But where are the fish?" remarked the Canadian. "I don't see any fish." "Why should that bother you, Ned?" said Conseil, "since you don't know the first thing about fish." "I know nothing. I'm a fisherman." Whereupon an argument sprang up between the two friends, because, although they knew everything about fish, each knew about them in different ways. It is widely known that fish are the fourth and last class of the subkingdom of vertebrates. They have been correctly described as cold-blooded vertebrates which have double circulation, breathe through gills, and can live only in water. They form two distinct groups: the class of bony fish, that is, those with spines made of bony vertebra, and cartilaginous fish, that is, those whose spine is made of cartilaginous vertebrae. Perhaps the Canadian was aware of the distinction, but Conseil knew far more about it than he did. However, having become firm friends with Ned, he did not want him to think that he knew any less on the subject than he did. Accordingly, he said, "Ned, you are a killer of fish, a very skilled fisherman. You have caught a very large number of these fascinating creatures, but I'll wager that you have no idea about how they are classified." "But I do," the harpooner said earnestly. "They are classed as fish you can eat, and fish you can't eat." "Ah, The view from the kitchen, said Conseil. But tell me, do you know the difference between bony fish and cartilaginous fish?
Now, maybe I do, Conseil.
And the subdivision of these two large classes?
Not a clue.
Well, Ned, listen and learn. Bony fish are subdivided into 6 orders. First, the Acanthopterygians. First, the Acanthopterygians, which have a complete, movable upper jaw and comb-shaped gills. This order includes 15 suborders, which include 3/4 of all known fish. Type, the common perch.
They make quite good eating,
replied Ned Land. Second, abdominal fish, with ventral fins located under the abdomen and behind the pectorals, but not attached to the bones of the shoulder. The order to which they belong is divided into 5 suborders and includes the majority of freshwater fish. Types, carp and pike.
Ugh,
retorted the Canadian scornfully.
Freshwater fish.
Third, said Conseil, the Sabrachians. Their ventral fins are attached under the pectorals and hang from the shoulder bones. This order contains 4 suborders. Types, plaice, dab, turbo, brill, sole, etc.
Excellent, all excellent,
exclaimed the harpooner, whose interest in fish was entirely culinary. Fourth, went on Conseil, refusing to be diverted, the apodals, which have cylindrical bodies, no pelvic fins, and are covered with a thick, often sticky skin. This order has only 1 suborder. Types, eels and electric eels.
Medium to poor,
said Ned Land. Fifth, persisted Conseil, the lophobranches, which have complete free jaws, but gills made of small tufts arranged in pairs along the brachial arches. This order has just 1 suborder. Types, seahorse and Pegasus sea moth.
Sounds disgusting.
Sixth and last, said Conseil, the plectognaths, whose maxillary bone is attached to the side of the intermaxilla, which forms the jaw. The palatine arch is imbricated with the cranium by sutures, and is thus held rigid. This order does not have ventral fins as such, and consists of 2 suborders. Types, globefish and triggerfish.
I wouldn't let them anywhere near a pan.
Have you got all that, Ned? asked the learned Conseil.
No, Conseil, none of it, replied the harpooner. But carry on all the same. You make it all sound so interesting.
Turning now to the cartilaginous fish, Conseil resumed imperturbably. They run to a mere 3 orders.
That's a mercy,
said Ned. First, the cyclostomes, having jaws that are fused and form a movable ring, and whose brachii, or gills, open through a number of orifices. An order with just 1 suborder. Type, lamprey.
Not to everybody's taste,
said Ned Land. Second, the cetaceans. Their brachii resemble the gills of the cyclostomes, but their lower jawbone is movable. The order, the largest in its class, consists of 2 suborders. Types, shark and ray.
What?
exclaimed Ned.
Rays and sharks in the same suborder? Conseil, if you have the interest of rays at heart, I wouldn't recommend that you put those 2 together in the same tank.
Third, continued Conseil, the sturionians, whose brachii ordinarily function through a single slit with a gill plate. This order has 4 suborders. Type, sturgeon.
Conseil, my friend, you've kept the best for last, at least in my opinion. Have you finished?
All done, Ned, said Conseil. But remember, when you know all that, you still don't know very much, for each suborder is subdivided into genera, subgenera, species and varieties.
Well, Conseil, said the harpooner, turning back to the window in the panel, here's a whole crowd of varieties swimming by.
Well, you wanted fish, exclaimed Conseil. It's almost like looking into an aquarium.
Hardly, I broke in. An aquarium is a cage, and those fish out there are free as the birds of the air. Go on then, Conseil, said Ned Land. Name them.
Oh, no, said Conseil. I couldn't. That is my employer's field. It was true. The excellent Conseil was a furious classifier, but no naturalist, and I'm not sure that he would have been able to tell a tuna from a bonito. He was, in a word, the opposite of the Canadian, who could put names to all these fish without hesitation. There's a triggerfish, I said.
And a Chinese triggerfish, said Ned Land.
Family Ballistidae, suborder Scleroderms, order of Plectognaths. Order of Plectognaths, murmured Conseil. Decidedly, put the two of them together, and Ned and Conseil would have made one first-rate naturalist. The Canadian was quite correct. A shoal of ballistes with flattened bodies, coarse skins, and armed with a dorsal sting were playing around the Nautilus and waving 4 rows of spines which bristled along each side of their tails. It would be difficult to imagine anything more admirable than their livery. Gray underneath, white on top, with patches of gold that gleamed in the dark swell of the water. Rays undulated between them like sheets blowing in the wind, and among them I was delighted to see a Chinese ray, yellowish on its upper side, delicate pink underneath, and equipped with 3 stings behind its eyes. A rare species, whose existence was still doubted in the time of Lessepidae, who had never seen it except in a book of Japanese engravings. For 2 hours, an entire aquatic army escorted the Nautilus. While they played and sported and strove to outdo the others in beauty, brilliant colorings, and speed, I made out a green wrasse, the barberin mullet, with its double black stripe, the elytriform goby, which has a rounded caudal fin, is white-colored and has splashes of violet on its back, the Japanese scombris, a gorgeous mackerel and a native of these waters, which has a blue body, a silver head, an azure fish, blue and gold, with a name which makes description redundant, striped spiratus, with variegated blue and yellow fins, shiner fish with bold black streaks on their caudal fins, zonifer spiratas, elegantly trim in their 6 belts, trumpet fish, or red oyster catchers, which are more or less mouths attached to flutes, some of which reached a length of a meter, Japanese salamanders, clouded morays, serpents 6 feet long with small, quick eyes and huge mouths bristling with teeth, and many, many more. Our admiration remained at the highest pitch. There was no end to our amazed exclamations. Ned gave the names of all the fish, and Conseil provided classifications, while I was in 7th heaven just watching the speed of their acrobatics and the beauty of their forms. Until that moment, it had never been given to me to observe these creatures living freely in their natural element. I will refrain from naming all the varieties which swim past our bedazzled eyes in a parade of all the species of the Japan and China seas. Those fish swarmed more numerous than the birds of the air, almost certainly attracted by the bright source of the electric light. Suddenly, the lights came on again in the great saloon. The metal panels slid shut. The enchanting vision disappeared. But I went on seeing it in my mind's eye for some time, until I caught sight of the instruments fixed to the walls. The compass still gave our course as north-northeast. The pressure gauge registered a figure of 5 atmospheres, which was the equivalent of a depth of 20 meters, and the electric patent log recorded a speed of 15 knots. I waited for Captain Nemo, but he did not return. By the clock, it was 5 p.m. Ned Land and Conseil went back to their cabin, and I to my room. My dinner was waiting for me. It consisted of turtle soup made of the tenderest hawksbills, the white, slightly flaky flesh of a whole surmullet, with the liver served separately, which made delicious eating, and fillets of Emperor holocanthus, which I thought was superior in flavor to salmon. I spent the evening reading, writing, and thinking. Then, as fatigue began to catch up on me, I lay down on my seagrass bed and fell into a deep sleep, while the Nautilus glided through the fast-flowing waters of the Black River. Wow. Chapter 15. A Formal Invitation. The following morning, the 9th of November, I did not wake until I had slept for 12 hours. Conseil came in, as he always did, to ask how Monsieur had passed the night, and offer his services. He had left his friend, the Canadian, snoring like a man who had never done anything other than sleep like a log all his life. I let the excellent fellow babble on freely without going out of my way to respond. My mind was full of the non-appearance of Captain Nemo at our session in the saloon the previous evening, and I was hoping to see him today. Soon I had got into my business clothes. Conseil commented on their fabric more than once. I told him they were made with the glossy, silky threads which anchor mussels, pen shells, and various kinds of shellfish, all abundant on the shores of the Mediterranean, to rocks. Once upon a time, they were regularly used to make excellent fabrics, stockings, and gloves, because of their qualities of softness and warmth. So the crew of the Nautilus were able to clothe themselves with a very small outlay, without needing to turn to the cotton plants, sheep, and silkworms of dry land. When I was dressed, I hurried off to the great saloon. There was no one there. I buried myself in a study of the conchological treasures, which filled its cabinets to bursting. I also wandered among vast herbariums, filled with the rarest marine plants, which, though they had been dried, still retained their vivid colors. Among those precious aquatic plants were examples of verticillate-clad stephus, sea pen pavinaria, vine-leaf caulerpa, Calathamnion granifero, delicate scarlet-hued Ceramium rubrum, fan-shaped agars, and assorted acetabularia, which resemble flattened mushroom caps, and were for a long time classified among the zoophytes, in other words, a wide range of algae. The whole day sped by without my being honored by a visit from Captain Nemo. The panels in the saloon walls did not open again. Perhaps the intention was that we should not get used to so much beauty and start taking it for granted. The course of the Nautilus remained east-northeast, her speed 12 knots, and her depth between 50 and 60 meters. The next day, the 10th of November, I was again ignored and left to myself. I saw no member of the crew. Ned and Conseil spent most of the day with me. They were amazed by the inexplicable absence of the captain. Was that singular man ill? Was he minded to change the plans he had for us? After all, as Conseil observed, we enjoyed complete freedom, and were delicately and abundantly fed. Our host kept to the terms of our agreement. We had nothing to complain of, and in any case, the strangeness of our fate had brought such wonderful compensations that we were as yet in no position to formulate charges against destiny. That day I began a log of these adventures, which has enabled me to relate them with the most scrupulous accuracy. Curiously enough, I wrote it on paper made from marine seagrass. Very early on the 11th of November, the cool air which filled the interior of the Nautilus told me that we had returned to the surface of the ocean to replenish our supplies of oxygen. I proceeded to the central stairwell and climbed up to the platform. It was 6 in the morning. I found a cloudy sky and a sea that was gray but calm. There was hardly any swell at all. I was hoping to meet Captain Nemo there. Would he come? I saw only the helmsman enclosed in his glass cage. I sat on the projection formed by the hull of the ship's dinghy and took deep breaths of the delicious salt air. Gradually, the mist cleared in the warm rays of the sun. Its radiant disk was edging above the eastern horizon. Trapped in its glare, the sea caught fire like a trail of gunpowder. Spread across the length and breadth of the vaults of heaven, the clouds scattered across the upper reaches of the sky took on bright, wonderfully varied hues, while numerous mares' tails were harbingers of winds for the rest of the day. But what could winds do to the Nautilus, which had nothing to fear from tempest and storm? So there I was, admiring the joyous sunrise, so cheering, so revitalizing, when I heard someone coming up to the platform. I was getting ready to greet Captain Nemo, but it was his first officer. I had already encountered him during that initial meeting with the captain, who appeared instead. He stepped out onto the platform, but did not seem aware of my presence. Holding a powerful telescope to one eye, he scoured each joint of the horizon with close attention. Once he had finished, he moved back to the hatchway and made a pronouncement in these exact words. I remember it clearly, for it was repeated every morning in identical circumstances. It sounded as follows: Nautron respok lornivich. What it meant, I could not possibly have said. Once he had pronounced these words, he disappeared below. Supposing that the Nautilus would now resume its course under water, I went back to the hatch, and thence, via the walkways, to my room. 5 days passed in this way, during which the situation did not change. Every morning I went up to the platform. The same words were pronounced by the same individual. Captain Nemo never appeared. I had resigned myself to not seeing him again, when on the 16th of November, going back to my room with Ned and Conseil, I found a note for me on the table. I opened it impatiently. It was written in a hand that was open and clear, though with a touch of Gothic resembling German script. It read as follows: Professor Aronnax, on board the Nautilus, the 16th of November, 1867. Captain Nemo has great pleasure in inviting Professor Aronnax to a hunting expedition, which will be held tomorrow morning in his forest of Crespo Island. He hopes that there is nothing that will prevent Professor Aronnax from attending, and will be gratified if his companions would also accompany him. Signed, Master of the Nautilus, Captain Nemo. A hunt! Exclaimed Ned. In the forests of Crespo Island, added Conseil. So he's going ashore then, is he? Said Ned. That seems clear enough from what he says here, I said, reading the note through again. In that case, we'll have to accept, said the Canadian. Once back on terra firma, we can decide on our next move. Anyway, I won't be sorry to get my teeth into a piece of fresh venison. Without trying to resolve the contradiction between Captain Nemo's stated detestation of continents and islands and this invitation to hunt in his forests, I just said, First, let's just see where this Crespo Island is. I turned to the planisphere, and at a position of latitude 32 degrees and 40 minutes north, and longitude 167 degrees and 50 minutes west, I discovered a small island which had been explored in 1801 by Captain Crespo, and was previously named on old Spanish charts as Roca de la Plata, or Silver Rock. We were thus about 1,800 miles from our starting point, and the slightly altered course of the Nautilus was taking us back towards the southwest. I pointed out this little lump of rock lost in the middle of the North Pacific to my companions. If Captain Nemo does indeed go ashore sometimes, I told them, at least he chooses desert islands. Ned Land shook his head without responding, and then he and Conseil left me to myself. After a supper served by the mute, stony-faced steward, it was with a somewhat troubled mind that I fell asleep. The moment I woke next morning, on the 17th of November, I sensed that the Nautilus was not moving. I dressed quickly and hastened to the great saloon. Captain Nemo was there, waiting for me. He stood up, wished me good morning, and asked if I was disposed to accompany him. As he himself did not refer to his absence during the past week, I refrained from mentioning the matter, and answered simply that my companions and I were ready to follow him. However, Captain, I added, I would like to ask you something. Please ask, Professor Aronnax, and if I can answer, then I shall. Well, Captain, how is it that you, who have cut all ties with the land, are the owner of forests on Crespo Island? Well, sir, the captain answered, the forests I own do not require the sun to provide either heat or light. They are home to no lions, tigers, panthers, or any other kind of quadruped. They are known only to me. They grow only for me. They are not land forests, but underwater forests. Underwater forests? I exclaimed. Yes, Professor. And you are offering to take me there? Indeed I am. On foot? And without getting your feet wet. While hunting? While hunting. With a gun in my hand? With a gun in your hand. I stared at the master of the Nautilus in a way which could not be construed as flattering. Decidedly, his wits have turned, I thought. He has been having a bout of insanity, which has lasted a week, and is obviously still going on. Such a shame. I liked him better strange than mad. This thought could be clearly read in my face, but Captain Nemo merely invited me to follow him, and I did so with the air of a man who is expecting the worst. We entered the dining room, where breakfast was ready. Professor Aronnax, said the captain, I would be glad if you would share my breakfast without ceremony. We can talk as we eat. I offered to take you on an expedition in a forest. I did not promise that you would find a restaurant there. So, make a hearty breakfast as befits a man who is not likely to sit down to his dinner until very late. I did full justice to the meal. It consisted of different kinds of fish and slices of sea cucumber, excellent zoophytes, served with spicy and very appetizing seaweeds, such as Porphyria lacinacia and Laurentia prima fetida. To drink we had water, to which, following the captain's example, I added a few drops of a fermented liquor extracted, by the Kamchatka method, from an algae, Rhodaminia palmata, known as sea lettuce. At first, Captain Nemo ate without uttering a single word. Then he said, When, Professor, I suggested you might come hunting with me in the forests of Crespo, you had thought you had caught me in contradiction with myself. When I told you that they were underwater forests, you thought I was mad. Well, sir, you should never judge a man lightly. Captain, please believe. Hear me out, and you will judge then whether you should still bring charges of madness or self-contradiction against me. I am listening.
Professor Aronnax, you know as well as I do that a man can live under water, provided he carries a supply of breathable air with him. Men who work underwater wear a watertight suit and a metal diving helmet which encases the head. Their air comes from the surface by means of force pumps, fitted with valves to control the flow.
Yes, it's what deep-sea divers wear.
Exactly. But in such conditions, man is not free. He is attached to the pump, which supplies him with air through a rubber pipe, which acts like a chain and keeps him linked on the land. If we had to be so closely bound to the Nautilus, we would not be able to go very far.
And how could you be free of it? I asked.
By using the Rouquayrol Denaruse by using the regulator, which was invented by two compatriots of yours, but adapted by myself for my own use. Now I'm going to try again. By using the Rouquayrol Denaruse regulator, which was invented by two compatriots of yours, but adapted by myself for my own use. It will enable you to venture into this new physical environment without damaging your internal organs in any way. It consists of a tank made of thick metal in which I store air at a pressure of 50 atmospheres. This tank is carried on the back by means of straps, like a soldier's knapsack. Its upper section serves as a chamber for the air, which is maintained by a system of bellows. The air cannot escape except at normal pressure. In the Rouquayrol regulator, as normally used, two rubber tubes lead out of this chamber to a kind of mask, which covers the diver's nose and mouth. One pipe introduces air, which is breathed in, and the other removes the air, which has been breathed out, with the tongue closing the first or the second according to the rhythms of respiration. But I operate under the sea at great depths, and have to contend with very high pressures, so I had to enclose my head entirely, as with the deep-sea diver, in a round copper helmet to which the inflow and outflow pipes are connected.
I see all that, Captain, but the air you carry with you must get used up very quickly, and as soon as air contains less than 15% of oxygen, it ceases to be breathable.
True, but as I've explained, Professor, the pumps on board the Nautilus allow me to store air at very high pressures, and given these conditions, the apparatus can supply breathable air for 9 or 10 hours.
I have no further comment to make, I replied. I would only ask, Captain, how you manage to see where you are going on the ocean bed.
With the Ruhmkorff apparatus, Professor. The tank is carried on the back, but this apparatus is attached to the belt. It consists of a Bunsen battery, which I turn on not using potassium bichromate, but sodium. An induction coil collects the electricity that is generated and transmits it to a specially designed lamp. In this lamp is a fine spiral of glass, which contains a trace only of carbon dioxide. When the lamp is turned on, this gas becomes luminous and gives out a steady whitish light, and so I can both breathe and see.
Captain Nemo, you provide such complete answers to all my objections that I hardly dare raise another. However, though I have no alternative but to accept the Rouquayrol regulator and the Ruhmkorff lamp, you must still allow me to have reservations about the gun you propose to arm me with.
However, it's not a weapon that requires gunpowder, said the captain.
So it's an air gun?
Of course. Surely you don't expect me to be able to make gunpowder on board my ship when I don't have saltpeter, sulfur, or coal.
In any case, I said, to shoot underwater in an environment 855 times denser than air, you would need to overcome enormous resistance.
That's not a problem. There are in existence certain kinds of cannon, based on designs by Fulton, and developed by the Englishmen Philip Coles and Burley Percy, a Frenchman, and the Italian Landi, which are fitted with a specially sealed firing mechanism that allows them to be used in precisely such conditions. But I repeat, not having gunpowder,
I have replaced it with high-pressure air, which the pumps of the Nautilus can give me in endless quantities. But doesn't that air get used up quickly? Yes, but there's always my Rouquayrol tank, which can give me more if needs be. All that's required is an improvised valve. But you shall see for yourself, Professor Aronnax, that when we go hunting underwater we shall not be using large quantities of air and ammunition. Yet I still feel that in conditions of semi-darkness, and when surrounded by liquid which is extremely dense compared with the atmosphere above, bullets won't carry very far, and will have difficulty being lethal. On the contrary, Professor, with this kind of gun, every shot is lethal. Once an animal is wounded, however lightly, it dies as if poleaxed. Why? Because this gun does not fire ordinary bullets, but small glass capsules invented by the Austrian chemist Linnebruck, of which I have a large stock. These glass capsules, encased in steel and weighted with a lead shot, are in effect miniature Leyden jars, into which the electricity has been forced at very high voltages. At the slightest shock caused by impact, the animal, however powerful it may be, is killed outright. I should add that the caliber of these capsules is no greater than at .4, and that the breech of an ordinary gun could hold 10 of them. I have no more questions, I said, getting up from the table. It only remains for me now to get my gun, and where you go, I shall go too. Captain Nemo led me towards the stern of the Nautilus, and as we passed by the cabin assigned to Ned and Conseil, I called to my two companions, who immediately fell in step with us. We stopped at a chamber situated amidships, near the engine room. There we would get into the clothes for venturing outside.